11 and a half years since the 2014 coup that started the war, and 3.5 years since the Russians invaded Ukraine. Meeting has been set up between Putin and Trump already now on Friday in Alaska. I was wondering what you make of this.
Well, I'm glad that you went back to 2014 when this particular section of this conflict began, the U.S. overthrow of the Ukrainian government. And if we think back even further than this, the end of the Cold War and openly declared U.S. policy to establish primacy over the globe to ensure no rivals of any kind, allied or adversarial, emerge. This is U.S. foreign policy. It has been since the end of the Cold War. It is right now. And so if nothing has fundamentally changed regarding this foreign policy or the special interests that are driving it and benefiting from it, then nothing can possibly change in regards to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And the Trump administration itself has been very clear what the actual goal is in all of this. They're trying to coerce, draw in Russia to accept a ceasefire so that the United States can have European forces, and they also said non-European forces, whoever that will be, move into Ukraine and freeze the conflict. They have no interest at all whatsoever in resolving this. We have to understand that the conflict itself is a U.S. war with Russia simply being fought through Ukraine. It is U.S. commanders at the top of the chain of command of the Ukrainian armed forces. It is the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency overseeing Ukrainian intelligence agencies who are killing journalists, generals, and others in the streets of Moscow, who are coordinating attacks using U.S. and European missiles to hit targets all across Russia. So this isn't something that's suddenly going to change. This is simply another ploy by the United States to draw in and outmaneuver geopolitically an adversary it still considers an adversary and will not give up in terms of encircling and containing.
Well, I think, this very much reflects Russia's main concern, though, that anything that comes from the U.S., also Trump, will be a temporary halt, simply because, the Russians are winning. So, which is why the Trump shift to a ceasefire was, I guess, opened up a lot of eyes in Moscow that perhaps this motivation by transforming relations.
It's hard to tell what the Russians will agree to, what their thinking is. We can only go off of what we see represented publicly. But the Trump administration itself, not saying nothing of the U.S.'s recent history of, even just in regards to Russia, trying to reset relations while at the same time preparing to utterly betray any sort of trust Russia places into the United States. The Trump administration itself has already used negotiations earlier this year, to draw in Iran for a decapitation strike the U.S. spent months preparing Israel to carry out, and used negotiations and we were warning about this, that they were going to use the negotiations to lower Iran's guard, to draw them in, and then have Israel carry out this attack that is essentially a U.S. attack carried out through Israel, so the U.S. can absolve itself from both responsibility and retaliation once the conflict began. And then the U.S. itself waded into the conflict almost immediately. And now they're doing the exact same thing to Russia. They're asking Russia, come negotiate with us. And this whole meeting between President Putin and President Trump in the United States should be of great concern to everyone. The United States has a history of killing national leaders. As I just mentioned, they tried to decapitate the Iranian leadership, military and civilian leadership. They also killed civilian scientists. Last year, the U.S. aided Israel in decapitating Hezbollah's leadership. And President Trump himself, just earlier this week, was bragging about how Iranian General Qasem Soleimani was lured to Iraq and killed in a U.S. drone strike he says he authorized in 2020. Why anyone would entertain meeting with the United States when this is their track record is beyond me. I just hope Russia understands all of this, that they're not blinded by the perception of success on the battlefield and some perceived leverage they have over the United States. The U.S. doesn't see things in these terms. They have a single-track mind. They have pursued this since the end of the Cold War up until now, without deviation, without interruption, and they will continue to pursue it. And the things that they are willing to do as they face increasing setbacks drives them to increasing desperation and thus danger. So people saying they would never do anything to President Putin, maybe not, but I think now, more likely now than ever before.
Yeah, well, there's, I guess, a track record here. Also, if you look at this isolated case of Ukraine, I mean, all the deals that were made, I always make the point that, you mentioned the European security architecture, or since the 90s, we actually had agreements with the Russians for a common European security architecture based on indivisible security and not dividing lines. But we walked back those in 2014. It's worth noting that when the government of Yanukovych was destabilized, the Europeans signed under this deal for a unity government, which they then broke within the next 24 hours. So they broke this agreement. Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul. So it's hard to believe that they're willing to give up Ukraine as this, very powerful dagger in the side of Russia. Indeed, we saw what happened in the Ukraine war, the attempt to activate Georgia as another front against Russia. I assume that this is the ideal purpose of Ukraine in the future, to have it something hanging over which they can use against the Russians for the next time tensions increase. Well, we're wondering what the mindset might be in Washington, because it doesn't have to be good intention. They can still want to continue fighting Russia, but wouldn't this be the best option for Washington now, to just put an end to this where it is?
No, because their overarching geopolitical objective is to contain Russia and China and everyone in between. And even now, as President Trump is inviting President Putin to go meet him in Alaska, the United States is still consolidating control over Azerbaijan and Armenia. We just saw that in the news, the corridor that was supposedly being leased to the United States of all countries for 99 years. This is literally in the Rand Corporation paper extending Russia from 2019, which lists all of these options to encircle, contain, and eventually collapse the Russian Federation. And so even as peace is being proposed, they're still going down the checklist, checking off all of these options. They're still using these options to place pressure on Russia and to encircle it. People have to understand this isn't a misunderstanding. This isn't, Biden's war, as President Trump continuously refers to it as. This is continuity of agenda, and the Trump administration had picked up exactly where the Biden administration left off. And it only is going to end in betrayal and tragedy for Russia if they were to fall for any of this.